The morning sun shone gently over the small village of Itoro. Birds sang from the trees, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air. In the middle of the village stood a big mango tree. Under its shade, a young woman named Amara was teaching a group of children. She had no classroom, no desks, and no chairs, just the ground, a small chalkboard, and her strong will to make a difference. Amara's dress was old and faded, but her smile never left her face. The children sat on mats and listened as she wrote letters on the chalkboard. A is for apple, she said, drawing the shape slowly. The children repeated after her, their voices bright and full of energy. She moved from one child to another, helping those who struggled to hold their pencils. To Amara, every small progress was a victory. The villagers admired her. Even though she earned very little and had lost her parents long ago, she refused to stop teaching. If we give up on learning, she would always say, we give up on our future. That afternoon, as she was teaching, a shiny black car drove slowly into the village. It was unlike anything the children had ever seen. The car stopped near the mango tree and the children whispered in surprise. The door opened and a tall man stepped out, wearing a fine suit and dark glasses. His shoes shone like mirrors. He looked around, confused by the dusty paths and simple houses. His name was Kunal, one of the richest young men in Lagos. He had come to inspect some land for his company's new project. But something caught his attention, the sound of children reading aloud under the tree. He turned and saw Amara teaching with great passion. Her voice was calm but full of energy. The children were focused, their eyes bright with hope. He watched for a long moment, puzzled by what he saw. After a while, he walked closer. The children stopped reading and looked at him curiously. Amara turned around, wiping chalk dust from her hands. She smiled politely. "Good afternoon, sir," she said. Kunal nodded and asked, "Good afternoon. What are you doing here? I mean, teaching outside like this." Amara smiled gently. "The old classroom fell apart last year," she explained. "We don't have money to rebuild it. But the children still want to learn, so we use this place." Kunal looked around. There were no tables or books, just happy faces and a teacher with strong faith. "You're doing all this with nothing?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise. Amara nodded. "Education doesn't wait for riches, sir. If we wait until we have everything, we'll lose too much time. These children deserve a chance, even if it means teaching them under the sun." Kunal said nothing for a while. He was a man used to wealth, used to seeing big offices and expensive schools. He couldn't understand how someone could be so devoted without pay or comfort. He looked at her again, her eyes were kind but firm, her smile full of hope. One of the children tugged Amara's arm and whispered, "Teacher, who is that man?" Amara laughed softly. "He's a guest, my dear. Let's greet him properly." The children stood up and shouted together, "Good afternoon, sir." Kunal's lips curved into a small smile. "Good afternoon, children," he replied. For the first time in a long while, he felt something warm in his heart, a kind of peace he hadn't known in the busy city. He watched as the children went back to learning. Amara continued to teach them simple math and songs. When a little boy dropped his pencil, she knelt and helped him pick it up. When another girl forgot her letters, Amara patiently repeated them again and again, never raising her voice. Kunal folded his arms, lost in thought. Why would someone with so little give so much of herself? He wondered. When the class ended, the children ran off laughing, holding their books close. Amara wiped the board clean and began packing her small bag. Kunal walked up to her. "You really love teaching, don't you?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "It's what I was born to do. I may not have much, but I have knowledge, and that is something I can share." Kunal looked at the old tree, the dusty ground, the broken remains of what once was a classroom nearby. "You could be teaching in the city," he said. "You'd earn more money." Amara smiled. "Maybe. But in the city, children already have teachers. Here they have no one else." Those words stayed with him. He had met many people in his life, business partners, investors, powerful men and women, but none spoke with such simple truth. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and gold. Kunal looked at the children waving goodbye in the distance, then back at Amara. "You've opened my eyes today," he said quietly. She tilted her head. "How so, sir?" He smiled faintly. "You've shown me that real value isn't in what we have, but in what we give." Amara's eyes softened. "Then I'm glad you stopped by our little school." Kunal nodded, still lost in thought. He had come to inspect land and make money, but somehow he found something far more valuable. As he walked back to his car, he turned one last time to see Amara sitting with a few children, reading them a story under the fading light. The sound of their laughter followed him as he drove away. For the rest of that evening he couldn't stop thinking about her words. Education doesn't wait for riches. He repeated them again and again, realizing how much truth they carried. That night, Kunal sat in his big house in Lagos, surrounded by luxury, yet his heart felt strangely empty. He thought about the teacher who smiled under a tree and gave children hope with nothing but a chalkboard and courage. And as the city lights flickered outside, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would return to Aitoro soon. But not as a visitor. He would return to build something that would change their lives forever. The next morning in Aitoro was bright and warm. The sound of roosters filled the air, and children ran along the dusty road toward the big mango tree, their school. Amara stood waiting for them, holding her small chalkboard as always. She was happy to see their excitement. Teaching them, even under the hot sun, gave her a reason to smile. Not long after, a sound none of them expected filled the air, the loud hum of a car engine. The children turned quickly. It was the same shiny black car from the day before. Dust rose as the car stopped near the tree. When the door opened, Kunal stepped out, smiling warmly. "Good morning, Teacher Amara," he said. The children gasped with joy when they saw the men behind him carrying boxes. Big ones filled with colorful books, pencils, notebooks, and even small bags of snacks. The children clapped and shouted, "Thank you, sir." Their laughter filled the whole area. Kunal smiled, watching their happy faces. He turned to Amara and said proudly, "I brought these for the children. They deserve something good." Amara smiled too, her eyes soft with gratitude. "Thank you, sir," she said kindly. Then she turned to the children. "Say thank you again." "Thank you, Uncle Kunal," the children shouted in one voice. Kunal laughed. "You're very welcome." He bent down and helped them open the boxes. The children's faces lit up when they saw the bright storybooks and pencils. Some of them had never owned a book before. One little boy held his pencil tightly like it was treasure. For a long while, Kunal helped Amara hand out the items. He even read a short story to the children. Though he was used to boardrooms and business meetings, he found himself laughing with them, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: peace. When the children sat down to eat the snacks he brought, Amara walked up to him. She smiled gently but said in a calm, serious voice, "Sir, these gifts are very kind. The children are happy. But what they truly need is a classroom." Kunal looked at her, a little surprised. "A classroom?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. The rain will come soon. These books and pencils will get wet. The children need a place where they can sit, read, and dream safely." Her words sank deep into his heart. No one had ever spoken to him like that, without fear, without trying to please him. She was honest and her voice carried strength. "I understand," he said quietly. "You're right." Amara smiled. "I'm only saying what the children need. You have already done more than enough, sir." Kunal shook his head slowly. "No. You're the one doing enough, more than anyone I know." He stayed for hours that day. He watched how Amara taught the children with patience. She never shouted or scolded them harshly. When a child made a mistake, she encouraged them. "Try again," she would say softly, smiling. "You can do it." A small girl named Titi couldn't read a sentence properly and almost started to cry. Amara knelt beside her, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "Don't be afraid. Learning takes time. Let's do it together." Kunal stood there quietly watching this. It amazed him. In his world, people only cared about results and money. But here, under a tree, he saw love, patience, and hope. The sun climbed high in the sky, and sweat formed on his forehead. Yet, Amara kept teaching like she didn't even notice the heat. Her voice was steady and full of life. When the lesson ended, the children ran home laughing, waving their new books. Amara stayed back to tidy the area. Kunal helped her gather the empty snack wrappers. She looked at him a bit surprised. "You don't need to do that, sir," she said. He smiled. "It's fine. I haven't done something simple like this in years." Amara laughed softly. "Maybe it's good for you then." For a moment they both stood there in silence. The gentle wind blew through the tree leaves, and the sound of children playing in the distance echoed around them. "You really care for these kids," Kunal said finally. "Even when no one helps you." Amara looked up at the sky and said quietly, "If I don't help them, who will? I believe that one day one of these children will grow up and change this village, maybe even the country." Kunal nodded slowly. "You have a big heart, Amara. Bigger than most people I know." She smiled a little shyly. "Maybe it's not big. Maybe it just refuses to give up." That simple sentence hit Kunal harder than any speech he had ever heard. When it was time for him to leave, the children ran after his car again, waving their small hands and shouting, "Goodbye, Uncle Cunnel." He waved back, smiling as the car drove away from the village. The road was long and quiet. Cunnel leaned back in his seat, deep in thought. His driver Musa looked at him through the mirror and asked, "Sir, you seem quiet. Is everything okay?" Cunnel nodded slowly, still staring out the window. "Musa, have you ever met someone who changes the way you see life with just a few words?" Musa laughed. "Not really, sir. But it sounds like you have." Cunnel smiled faintly. "Yes, that woman. Mara. She has nothing, no money, no power. Yet she's the richest person I've ever met." Musa raised his eyebrows. "Richest, sir? How?" Cunnel looked out at the open fields and said softly, "She's rich in kindness. She gives everything without expecting anything back." For the rest of the drive he stayed silent, lost in thought. When they reached his big mansion in Lagos that evening, he didn't feel proud or happy as usual. The house felt empty, quiet, and cold. He walked through the halls filled with paintings and marble floors, yet all he could see in his mind was Amara standing under the tree, surrounded by children who adored her. Later that night he sat on his balcony and looked at the city lights. They sparkled like stars, but none of them felt as bright as the joy he saw in those children's eyes. He thought of the broken school building in Itoro and Amara's voice saying, "The children need a classroom more than sweets." He knew she was right. For the first time in a long while, he didn't think about profit or business. He thought about purpose. He turned to Musa, who was setting his briefcase down nearby, and said quietly, "Prepare a team. We're going back to Itoro soon. I want to build something that will last." Musa smiled. "Yes, sir." As Cunnel leaned back in his chair, a small smile touched his lips. Somewhere deep inside he felt lighter. Maybe for the first time in his life he had found something more important than money, a reason to care. Days passed in Itoro, and Cunnel kept returning to the small village. Every time he came, the children would run out to greet him. "Uncle Cunnel. Uncle Cunnel," they would shout, their small feet raising clouds of dust. He would smile and wave at them, carrying bags filled with cement, wood, or books. The once empty field under the mango tree was slowly changing into something new, the start of a real classroom. Amara could hardly believe it. What began as a visit from a kind stranger was turning into a blessing for the whole village. Every day she watched as workers built walls from bricks and wood that Cunnel had brought. He didn't just send money, he worked with them. Sometimes he would roll up his sleeves and carry sand with the villagers, laughing like one of them. The people admired him for that. One old woman whispered to another, "That rich man is different. He doesn't act proud." Another villager smiled and said quietly, "Maybe love has made him humble." Soon the whispers spread all around Itoro. Whenever Cunnel came to the school, people smiled knowingly. "The rich man has fallen for our teacher," they would say. Amara always laughed when she heard it. "No, no," she told them. "He's just helping the children." But when she said it, her smile lasted a little too long, and her eyes sparkled a little too brightly. Deep inside she couldn't deny the warmth that grew whenever she saw Cunnel. One morning Cunnel arrived earlier than usual. The sun was still rising, painting the sky with orange and pink. Amara was sweeping the classroom floor, humming softly. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled. "You're early today." Cunnel chuckled. "I wanted to see how the new roof looks before the workers start." He helped her carry the desks inside. It was hard work, but they laughed through it. At one point, Cunnel lifted a heavy desk and pretended to struggle. "Teacher Amara, I think this desk is too strong for me," he said jokingly. Amara giggled. "For a big man like you? I don't believe that." They both laughed again. The children arrived soon after, filling the classroom with cheerful noise. Some of them had never seen a real building made just for them, and they kept touching the walls like it was magic. Cunnel watched them with pride. "Look at their faces," he said softly. "It was worth every brick." Amara nodded. "Yes. You've given them hope." He looked at her. "No, Amara. You gave them hope. I only followed your example." For a moment they just stood there, eyes meeting. Something gentle but strong passed between them. Amara quickly turned away, pretending to check the books on the table. As the days went by, their friendship grew. Cunnel helped paint the classroom walls and even joined in teaching sometimes. The children loved him. They would crowd around him, asking questions or showing their drawings. One afternoon, while the children were reading aloud, a little boy named Timmy raised his hand and said loudly, "Uncle Cunnel, will you marry our teacher?" The whole class burst into laughter. Even the other villagers who were nearby laughed. Amara froze in surprise, her face turning bright red. "Timmy," she said quickly. "That's not something you ask in class. Read your book." But the laughter only grew louder. Cunnel smiled, but instead of laughing like the others, he looked straight at Amara and said softly, "Maybe one day." The room went silent for a moment. The children looked at each other with wide eyes, and then they all giggled again. Amara's cheeks burned even more. She turned her face away, pretending to rearrange the chalks, but she couldn't hide her smile. After class, as the children ran outside to play, Amara stayed back to clean the room. Cunnel stood by the doorway watching her. "Did I embarrass you?" he asked gently. She shook her head quickly. "No, it's just that children say funny things sometimes." He smiled. "Sometimes children say the truth before adults dare to." Amara's hands froze over the desk she was cleaning. She looked up at him slowly. His eyes were calm but sincere. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. The wind blew softly through the open window, moving her scarf. Then she said quietly, "You shouldn't listen to gossip, Mr. Cunnel." "I'm not listening to gossip," he replied. "I'm listening to my heart." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say, so she smiled awkwardly and picked up her books. "You should go before the children come back," she said, trying to change the topic. Cunnel laughed softly. "You're right, Teacher Amara. I don't want to be scolded again." When he left, Amara stood alone in the classroom for a while. She looked at the chalkboard where the children had written, "Thank you, Uncle Cunnel," in large, uneven letters. Slowly she smiled. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She sat by the small oil lamp in her room, staring at the stars through the window. Her heart felt light, yet she was confused. She hadn't felt this way in a long time, hopeful, nervous, and happy all at once. She remembered her late father's words, "Love doesn't always come with wealth or beauty. Sometimes it comes with kindness and truth." She whispered to herself, "Maybe Papa was right." At the same time, in his mansion far away in Lagos, Cunnel sat on his balcony again. The city lights shone brightly, but his thoughts were back in Itoro. Back to Amara's smile, the children's laughter, and that little boy's innocent question. He found himself smiling as he whispered, "Maybe one day." The next morning he returned to the village again, pretending it was to check on the classroom. But everyone noticed something different in his eyes. The villagers smiled knowingly as he passed by. One man whispered, "He doesn't just come for the school anymore." Cunnel joined the workers again, painting, fixing, and helping. During lunch he sat under the tree with Amara and the children. They shared food, stories, and laughter. For a man who once dined in luxury hotels, the simple meal of rice and stew eaten from one bowl felt more satisfying than any feast he had ever had. After the meal, Amara noticed how tired he looked. "You should rest, sir," she said softly. He smiled. "Not yet. I still have work to do." She laughed lightly. "You work too hard for someone who doesn't get paid." Cunnel looked at her with a playful smile. "Maybe the reward I want isn't money." Amara's heart raced again and she quickly turned away, pretending to check on the children. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened quietly. They talked more, laughed more, and even shared stories about their childhoods. Cunnel told her about his lonely life in the city, where people only pretended to care. Amara listened with kind eyes and said, "Maybe you needed to come here to remember what real happiness feels like." He nodded slowly. "Maybe I did." As the sun set behind the hills that evening, Amara watched the golden light fall over the new school building. The walls were almost done. She felt proud, not just for the children, but for something else she couldn't yet explain. And somewhere deep inside her heart, she knew that life in Itoro was about to change, not only for the children but for her too. For the first time in years, Amara allowed herself to feel something she had long locked away, hope. The day finally came when the new school in Itoro was ready. For weeks, the villagers had watched the walls rise, the windows shine, and the roof take shape. It had once been only a dream in Amara's heart, but now, it stood tall and beautiful in the center of the village. The smell of fresh paint filled the air, and bright letters above the entrance read, "Itoro Community School." The children ran around the yard, laughing and shouting with joy. Their old chalkboard under the mango tree was now replaced with real classrooms. The desks were simple but they shone like treasure to them. They couldn't stop touching everything, the tables, the chairs, the books. For most of them this was their first real classroom. Amara stood outside, wearing her best dress, a clean, neatly pressed blue gown. Her hair was tied in a simple bun, and her eyes sparkled with pride. Around her, women carried trays of food, men set up benches, and children sang songs of joy. When Cunnel arrived, the whole village cheered. He stepped out of his car in a plain white shirt and black trousers. No suit, no tie, just a warm smile. People clapped and called out, "Baba Kunal, our helper has come." He laughed softly and waved at everyone, feeling a kind of happiness he hadn't felt in years. For once, this crowd was not filled with business partners or reporters. These were simple people who truly appreciated what he had done. Amara walked toward him slowly. "Welcome, Mr. Kunal," she said with a smile. "Please just call me Kunal," he said kindly. "Today I'm not a businessman. I'm part of iToro." Amara smiled wider. "Then welcome home." Those two words touched him more than she knew. Welcome home. For years he had lived in big houses and traveled the world, but none of those places ever felt like home. Yet here, in this small village, surrounded by laughter and love, something inside him finally felt at peace. As the sun climbed higher, the ceremony began. The villagers gathered in front of the new school building. The pastor prayed, the children sang, and drums played softly in the background. When it was time for Kunal to speak, he stepped forward and held the microphone. He looked at the smiling faces before him, children with bright eyes, mothers with proud hearts, and elders who nodded with gratitude. Then his eyes rested on Amara, standing a few steps away. He took a deep breath and said, "My friends, this school is not a gift from me. It is the dream of a teacher who refused to give up." The crowd went silent for a moment, and then loud applause filled the air. Everyone turned to look at Amara, who quickly lowered her eyes, blushing deeply. Kunal continued, "I came to iToro for business, but I found something far greater. I met a woman who showed me what true kindness looks like. She gave her time, her heart, and her strength to teach children under a tree when there were no walls, no books, and no pay. That woman is the reason this school stands today." The people clapped louder now. Some shouted, "God bless Teacher Amara." Others cheered, "Long live our teacher." Amara's hands trembled slightly as she wiped a tear from her eye. She looked up at Kunal, her heart full of emotion. When the applause faded, she walked toward him slowly and whispered, "Thank you, Kunal." He smiled gently. "No, Amara. Thank you. You taught me what real kindness looks like." Their eyes met for a moment that felt endless. The crowd around them faded, only the two of them existed in that instant. There was no billionaire or poor teacher anymore, just two souls who had found meaning in each other's strength. After the speeches, the ribbon was cut, and the children ran inside the new classrooms for the first time. Their laughter echoed through the hallways like music. Kunal watched them and said softly, "This is the sound of change." Amara nodded beside him. "Yes. It's the sound of dreams coming true." Later that day, as the celebration continued, Kunal joined the villagers in eating jollof rice and fried plantain. He sat under the same mango tree where he had first seen Amara teaching. The villagers laughed, danced, and sang songs of joy. A little girl brought him a flower and said, "Thank you, Uncle Kunal. We love our new school." He smiled warmly and took the flower. "You're welcome, my dear. Study hard and make Teacher Amara proud." The girl giggled and ran off. When the music slowed down, Amara walked over with 2 plates of food. She handed one to him. "You've worked hard, sir. Eat before it gets cold." He took the plate and smiled. "Thank you, but remember, I told you to stop calling me sir." She laughed lightly. Old habits die hard. They ate quietly for a while, watching the villagers dance. Then Kunal turned to her and said, "You know, when I first came here, I thought I was just helping. But now, I see that you helped me more than I helped anyone else." Amara looked at him with surprise. "How?" He looked out toward the horizon and said softly, "You reminded me of what truly matters. Life isn't about what we own, but who we touch with kindness." Amara smiled gently. "Then maybe we both learned something." The evening sky turned golden and the air grew calm. The children played until sunset, their laughter blending with the sound of the drums. As the stars began to appear, Kunal stayed longer than he had planned. He found himself sitting on the school steps beside Amara, watching the lights fade. The village was quiet now. A few lamps glowed in the distance. Kunal sighed softly. "You know, I've been to many places, but nowhere feels like this. I think I've found peace here." Amara turned to him. "Maybe peace isn't a place, Kunal. Maybe it's found in the people who make us feel at home." He looked at her, smiling. "Then I guess I've found both, the place and the person." Amara blushed and looked down at her hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The crickets sang softly and a cool breeze passed between them. Kunal reached into his pocket and took out a small notebook. Inside it was the plan for the next project, a library beside the school. He handed it to her. "What do you think about this idea?" Amara flipped through the pages, her eyes widening. A library? Oh, Cunnel, that would be wonderful for the children. He nodded. Then we'll build it, together. Her heart filled with warmth as she whispered, "Thank you." Cunnel shook his head. "No. Thank you for showing me that wealth means nothing without purpose." That night, the villagers celebrated late into the evening. Laughter echoed across the fields, and the stars shone brighter than ever. When Cunnel finally prepared to leave, he looked around once more at the smiling faces, the new school, and the woman who had changed his life. He thought quietly, "This is where my heart belongs." And though he returned to Lagos often, he kept finding reasons to come back to Itoro. Not for business, but for the peace he found near Amara. Months passed after the big school opening in Itoro. The new classrooms were full of laughter every day, and children proudly wore their uniforms, carrying their books with joy. Amara continued teaching with the same passion as always. Even though the school was new and beautiful, she still gathered the children under the old mango tree sometimes, saying, "This is where our dreams began." Cunnel had returned to Lagos after the ceremony. He was busy with meetings, calls, and all the noise of the city. Yet, no matter how busy he became, his thoughts kept returning to the quiet village, and to the woman whose smile had changed his heart. Every time he sat in his office, he remembered her words, "Education doesn't wait for riches." Those words stayed in his mind like a gentle song. One morning he looked out the window of his tall building and saw the city moving fast, cars, people, lights everywhere. But instead of feeling proud, he felt lonely. He missed the peace of Itoro, the sound of children laughing, and the warmth of Amara's presence. He closed his laptop, stood up, and said to his assistant, "Cancel all my meetings for the week." That evening, without guards, without a driver, and without his usual fancy suit, Cunnel packed a small bag and left Lagos quietly. He drove for hours until he reached the familiar dusty road that led into the village. The breeze felt softer there and the air smelled like home. When he arrived in Itoro, the children saw him first. "Uncle Cunnel! Uncle Cunnel!" they shouted, running toward his car. He laughed as they surrounded him, their faces bright with excitement. Some of them were barefoot, holding their notebooks close. One small boy tugged at his sleeve and said, "Teacher Amara is still teaching under the big tree." Cunnel smiled, his heart full. He picked up the small bouquet of flowers he had brought and walked toward the tree. The same old place still looked peaceful, the wide shade of the branches, the sound of birds singing, and Amara's calm voice as she read aloud to the children. For a moment he stood quietly watching her. She hadn't changed much, still simple, still beautiful in her grace. Her eyes shone as she taught, and her laughter blended with the children's giggles. It was a sight he could never tire of. When the lesson ended, the children ran off to play, leaving Amara packing her books. She turned and froze when she saw him standing there with flowers in his hand. "Cunnel?" she whispered, her voice soft with surprise. He smiled and walked closer. "Hello, Teacher Amara." She laughed lightly, still shocked. "You came back. You didn't even send word." He shook his head. "I didn't want to come as the billionaire this time. I wanted to come as just Cunnel, the man who found peace here." Amara smiled warmly. "You're always welcome here. The children have missed you." He took a deep breath, then said softly, "It's not only the children who missed you, Amara. I did too." She blinked, unsure what to say. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of flowers and fresh earth. Cunnel looked into her eyes, his voice gentle but firm. "Amara, you opened my eyes and my heart. You showed me that true wealth is not in money or power, it's in love, kindness, and purpose." Her hands trembled slightly as she held her books. "Cunnel, what are you saying?" He smiled, stepping closer. "I'm saying I don't want to live another day without you by my side. Will you walk this life with me?" Amara gasped softly, her eyes wide. "You mean, marry you?" He nodded with a smile that reached his heart. "Yes, Amara. You captured my heart not with beauty but with goodness. I want a life that feels real, and that life begins with you." For a moment, Amara couldn't speak. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him. The same man who had once stood in a suit, watching her teach under this very tree, now holding flowers instead of wealth. Slowly she whispered, "Cunnel, I don't know what to say." He took her hand gently. "Just say yes." A single tear rolled down her cheek as she smiled. "Yes." The children, who had been watching from a distance, started clapping and cheering. "Teacher Amara is getting married," they shouted. The sound of laughter and joy filled the air again. A few months later they married quietly in the same village. The ceremony was small but beautiful. The pastor blessed them under the mango tree where they had first met. Amara wore a simple white dress and Kunal wore a plain white shirt. There were no cameras, no crowd of rich guests, only the people of Itoro, the children, and the sound of happiness. After the ceremony, Mama Ruth, an old woman from the village, said with a smile, "You see? Love does not care for riches. It follows the heart." Kunal laughed and nodded. "You are right, Mama. Love brought me home." In the days that followed, Kunal and Amara worked together to build more schools in poor villages. They traveled across the country helping children who had never been to school before. Wherever they went, people said, "That's the couple who build schools with love." Amara continued teaching not because she needed to, but because it was her passion. She still spoke softly to every child, still encouraged them, still believed that education could change lives. Kunal often watched her from afar, proud and grateful. One day a small girl asked her, "Teacher, who built this school?" Amara smiled and said, "Love did, my dear. Love built our school." The little girl laughed, not fully understanding, but the words stayed in her heart. Years later, when people spoke of the famous billionaire Kunal, they also spoke of the village teacher who changed his world. They said theirs was a love that began with kindness and grew into something powerful, something that touched many lives. Every time Kunal and Amara returned to Itoro, they sat under the old mango tree where it all began. They would watch the children run by, holding their books close, and Amara would say, "This is where everything started." And Kunal would smile and reply, "Yes, right here, where love found us both." As the sun set over the village, the children's laughter echoed through the air, and the mango tree stood tall, shading the roots of a story built not on money, but on kindness, faith, and love that changed countless lives. The end.